Because the hottest trend is billionaire survivalist bunkers.
They're designing underground shelters for comfort, I would say luxury.
Zuckerberg just dropped $250 million for a bunker in Hawaii.
That's just like a little shelter under, and it's like a basement.
little shelter.
I do have an underground tunnel.
Do you really?
Yeah.
The billionaires are up to some shit. Faced with climate catastrophe and global unrest, they're burrowing underground. But let's say their plans pay off. Let's say their bunkers and their paranoid fantasies are put to the test. Then what? I'm not even talking about the horror of only a handful of the rich surviving the apocalypse. I'm talking about the day-to-day. You have to live down here. Some of the bunkers are small, meant to house immediate friends and family for a year or so. Others are more ambitious. Zuckerberg's bunker is built to house over 100 people. He plans to include a full team of staff. Others are planning for a more open-ended survival scenario, including sustainable features like hydroponic gardens. Let's imagine the biggest, most impressive bunker for our thought experiment. Let's say it's built to house 1,000 people for a scenario where shit has well and truly hit the fan. In this version of the future, the surface won't be safe again for 100 years. Longer than your lifespan. You aren't one of the billionaires. Maybe your spouse or a parent worked in tech and nabbed a spot. But once you're sealed in here, you'll never see the outside world again. You're assured this will all be worth it. A brighter and better future awaits. Just not for you. What does it mean to live indoors? To be born indoors? To die indoors? The same steady 4 walls to hold us, to circulate the same air. The temperature, constant. The lights, on demand. To come to know every sound, the clicking of a radiator, the jolt of a pipe. Steady, constant, safe. How long can you stay indoors? What would you miss? The sun, the wind, the enormity of the sky. Would you miss these things if you'd never known them? The silo is connected by a central staircase, spiraling past hundreds of floors. Here, tens of thousands of people live out their lives. They have jobs, families, they celebrate holidays, and their only concept of outside comes via a wall screen in the cafeteria displaying a charred and ruined landscape. The series is based on a trilogy of books by Hugh Howey, and I want to be careful about spoilers since the show is still going, so here's what we're going to do. I've corralled all of my spoilers that happen after season 2 of the show into one section later in the video. There's going to be an obvious warning before it so that you can skip to the next chapter, and the rest of the video will still make sense. Nobody knows how long the silo has stood. Nobody knows where it came from or why. Maybe someday they'll get to go outside again, but that day is not today. The silo was built for near perpetuity. A massive generator provides power, farms provide food, clothing and belongings are broken down and recycled into new materials. To keep the population in check, a lottery grants couples the right to have children, and the dead are buried in the soil beneath the farms, their absence making room for a new lottery ticket, their bodies fueling the crops that will feed the next generation. A closed system is like a sealed terrarium. Energy is still being exchanged, like heat and sunlight, but no new materials come in or out. And terrariums can last a long time. The oldest closed terrarium on record has survived for over 50 years without being opened. No water, no fertilizer. They're a miniature version of the Earth's atmosphere trapped in a bottle. Plants absorb sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. In exchange, they release oxygen. Bacteria and insects in the soil breathe oxygen, while they eat decaying leaves and release CO2. And water from the soil evaporates and forms condensation, which falls back to the plants. In theory, A perfectly balanced closed system could survive almost indefinitely. But they never do. In 1991, 8 scientists sealed themselves inside what was essentially a 3-acre terrarium. They wouldn't step outside again for 2 full years. The building held 7 biomes, including a miniature rainforest, an ocean with a living coral reef, a farm, and human living quarters. They were populated with plants and animals collected from around the world. The crew living here would be self-sustaining. They would grow their own food and breathe air from their own atmosphere.
This is Biosphere 2. It was named as a sequel to call attention to the fact that Biosphere 1 is planet Earth. News organizations called Biosphere 2 one of the most significant scientific projects of our time. If it worked, they suggested, it might save the world. But it wasn't all good news. Before the doors had even sealed shut, the plan received scrutiny. Because these weren't traditional scientists who would be living inside. They called themselves the Synergists. Their leader was a man named John Allen, and this wasn't their first project. Previously, they'd been a touring theater group, sailing around the world in a boat they had collectively built by hand. They also did sustainability projects. They set up wastewater recycling systems, they studied coral reefs, they helped fix overgrazed farmland in the Australian outback. And whether a cult, as some argued, or an intentional community, as the Synergists called themselves, they were close. They were family.
Biosphere 2 was their biggest venture to date. Nothing on this scale had ever been attempted before, which is kind of surprising, because if we ever hoped to explore the galaxy or to set up camp on Mars, we'd need to perfect running a closed system, and we didn't know if that was possible. As Jane Poynter, one of the Biosphereans, writes, "Can a life system that evolved on a planetary scale over billions of years be bottled?" The silo runs into trouble when its generator falters. The giant blades that power the machine are off-kilter. Years of temporary fixes have resulted in an increasingly unbalanced system, like a wobbling top. The entire silo has been operating under a similar ethos, the community building up pressure and blowing off steam. The silo's solution for stabilizing the wobbling top of their community happens via what they call cleanings. The number 1 rule of the silo? If you ask to go outside, you will go outside. The second thing you can depend on? The people who are sent outside always clean. The display in the cafeteria is recorded from a sensor mounted outside the building. Dust and grime build up on the lens, muddying the display over time. During a cleaning, the newly exiled community member always takes the time to wipe the lens. With the view now clear for curious onlookers, the cleaner stumbles forward into the great unknown and takes their last choking breaths of the toxic air. The cleanings are a release for the mounting social tension within the silo, a reminder for why they're caged to begin with. And it works. For a while. But like bending the great blades of the generator to keep them spinning, the cleanings are only a temporary fix. Without a meaningful change to the system, they're only buying time until the whole thing boils over.
Life inside the biosphere went okay, at first. But as the months ticked by, the isolation and the monotony began to wear the crew thin. The biosphere became something of a sensory deprivation tank. Every day, the same 3 acres, the same 8 people, no wind, no weather, no change in scenery, nowhere to escape. The crew described themselves as feeling increasingly sensitive and volatile. An offhand remark or a negative tone would send them into a spiral for the rest of the day. They became paranoid. They started fighting. Fighting escalated into screaming matches, throwing plates. People were spitting in each other's faces. People who, just months prior, considered themselves family.
Social breakdowns in isolation and containment are common. Antarctica is one of our closest analogs for life on a hostile planet. Covered by an ice sheet 3 kilometers thick, there's no sunlight for half the year. The average winter temperature is minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. In some places, hurricane-force winds blow through on a weekly basis. Move inland from the coast, and you'll find no signs of life, no plants, no animals. Except us. There's no permanent population living in Antarctica. But since 1957, we've established a constant presence there. Humans work on research stations dotted around the continent. One of the most isolated of these is the South Pole Station, one of the few inland stations occupying the southernmost point on Earth. Scientists and crew members live and work at the station year-round in shifts. Most work happens during the summer, where about 150 people populate the station. But when their contract ends, a skeleton crew of about 50 people remain behind to keep the station running. When the last plane departs and the sun sets for the winter, there's no option to change your mind. This is where you'll remain, surrounded by darkness and cold, cut off from the outside world, for the next 9 months. This has, predictably, a negative effect on the human psyche. Winter over syndrome is the name given to the cluster of symptoms experienced by crew members during an Arctic winter. Depression, anxiety, and sleep disorders are common. The monotony of the days often leads to missing time and dissociation, known as the Antarctic stare. Crews dip into spells of irritability, paranoia, even psychosis. When you live and work in the same building, and the outside world is hostile, you can't walk away from a conflict. And the researchers at the South Pole Station have an end date to their contracts. What happens to winter over syndrome when winter never ends? Back inside the biosphere, things were not going great. The crops didn't grow as well as expected. An unusually overcast winter wiped out entire species of plants, leaving the crew without vital staples like potatoes and beans.
Meanwhile, an unexplained oxygen leak was leaving the crew lethargic and depressed. They were quite literally starving and suffocating. Outside the biosphere, things weren't going much better. The project was hemorrhaging cash. Its original budget of $30 million had ballooned to nearly $250 million. Bad publicity plagued the biosphere. Their investor was growing antsy, and their leader, John Allen, was losing control. A fracture formed between the Biospherians. Half of them wanted to breach the seal, to bring in supplemental fresh air and food. The other half remained fiercely loyal to John Allen, and John Allen wanted the doors to remain sealed shut.
Residents of the silo grow up with warning tales of an uprising that happened before anyone alive today can remember. They're told the goal of the rebellion was to open the doors to the outside world, and that doing so would have poisoned the silo as the toxic air seeped in. And so, to become curious about the outside world is to pose a threat to your community. Residents self-police, discouraging their friends and spouses from asking questions, talk too much about the outside, and outside will come to you. I feel basic for this, but when we're talking about bunkers, I can't not talk about Fallout. The world of Fallout explores a post-apocalyptic America after an atomic war. Prior to the war, a corporation called Vault-Tec sought to profit off of growing nuclear fears by selling spots in Fallout shelters known as vaults. Worried families snapped them up, and when the bombs fell, they were sealed away to safety. The Fallout games primarily take place above ground, where new societies have sprung up in the wreckage. The stories of the vaults are largely explored posthumously as your character pieces together their stories via text files found on derelict computers. I think it's why I'm so drawn to the pieces of the world which explore the implications of what it means to grow up in a living, breathing vault. The first Fallout game does this perhaps the most succinctly. You grew up safely sealed away inside a vault, but the controller chip for the building's water purification system is failing. Without it, your community is running out of drinking water. They can't make another one. The closed system doesn't have the materials, and so the Vault Overseer sends you off into the wasteland in search of a replacement chip. In your adventures, you learn about life on the surface, about the communities that have sprung up in the wreckage, some hostile, others peaceful and self-sustaining. And at the end of the game, spoiler alert for a game that was released in 1997, you succeed in bringing the chip back to the Overseer. He praises you for saving the vault. You've saved their lives, he says, maybe even saved the human race.
That makes the rest of this even harder. Everyone will want to talk to you. Every youngster will look up to you and want to emulate you. And then what? They'll want to leave. What happens to the vault if we lose the best of a generation? What if we are the only safe place in the world? You saved us, but you'll kill us. I'm sorry. You're a hero, and you have to leave.
In the 70s, NASA's art program, remember how we used to fund art and NASA? NASA's art program explored space colonies, envisioning massive ships that could hold entire societies. Because say we needed to leave our home planet behind, say we discovered another Earth-like planet that could sustain us, that planet would be galaxies away. And unless our understanding of physics changes, we couldn't make a trip like that in a single human lifespan. This is the thought experiment of a generation ship, a ship whose crew would pass through multiple generations before getting from point A to point B. You could be born on the ship and die on the ship without ever setting foot on the solid ground of a planet. Rivers Solomon explores the concept in a book called An Unkindness of Ghosts. Astor lives on the lower level of a ship called the Matilda. It's been traveling from Earth to an unknown promised land for hundreds and hundreds of years. Its crew has never known their home planet, and they'll never know their destination. The floors of the Matilda are segregated. White residents of the ship live on the upper levels, while residents with darker skin are relegated to the lower decks, performing manual labor and suffering heavy abuse. The Matilda has physical barriers to travel. Members of the lower decks don't have access to the upper decks without permission. In fact, the various decks have been kept so separate, different floors have established different languages, which only further limits communication. 20,000 low-deckers and almost half as many different ways of life, Rivers Solomon writes. That was the nature of a ship divided by metal, language, and armed guards. The silo, too, has a hierarchy between the so-called up-toppers and members of the down deep. Within the down deep, mechanical is responsible for maintaining the struggling generator. Their work is dangerous. They work long, grueling shifts, and they're often met with suspicion from those on the higher levels. When Juliet, a member of mechanical, is elected sheriff, it's a shocking and unprecedented decision that will ultimately destabilize the silo. Juliet learns about the costs associated with communication. She says she can understand why radios are reserved for those in authority, because only one person can transmit at a time. But why is it cheaper to send someone a paper note on foot via a porter than it is to wire a message from a computer, a process which charges per character? Paper isn't cheap, neither are porters, but it seems like sending a wire would be practically free, Juliet says. It's just information. It weighs nothing. The design of the silo, with its single central staircase, prevents easy travel. It takes days to climb the 144 levels. Few ever bother making the journey. The silo's pact, which is a bible of laws maintained by its leaders, prohibits mechanized pulleys and lifts. What if it's to make talking with each other more difficult? Juliet wonders aloud. Separate us, make us keep our thoughts to ourselves. Her deputy shrugs. Why would anyone want to do that? Harkening back to the billionaire bunkers, with Zuckerberg's plan to fill his little shelter,
That's just like a little shelter.
with the ultra-rich and their employees, it doesn't take a huge leap of the imagination to think about how a closed system, within a few generations, could become so heavily stratified. It's worth noting that a lot of the Biospherians also came from money. Dropping everything to join a traveling theater troupe is easier when you have a safety net. And the Biosphere was only possible because John Allen was close friends with a billionaire, a friendship that was starting to go south as the project unraveled.
Biosphere 2, a daring experiment in future living. But who's in charge of this $150 million terrarium? Why won't they talk, and what are they hiding? Now it can be told.
The New York edition, tonight at 7 on Channel 4.
In an effort to maintain control over the narrative, John Allen became paranoid about speaking to the media. He started walking out of interviews, and as the point person between the Biospherians and the outside world, he began restricting their communication.
John Allen controls who gets to communicate with whom. And there are certain people that I'm not supposed to talk to who are scientists, who I would really like to talk to, particularly about oxygen. And these are people that I'm not supposed to talk with directly.
On the Matilda, after the death of her mother, Aster was raised by a woman she calls Aunt Melusine. As a child, Melusine showed Aster a Polaroid camera that had been passed down within her family for generations. Knowing that the camera had limited use, Melusine's family had captured one image per generation, one image to document their lives. Aster stared at a picture of someone standing in a vast expanse of water, stretching, impossibly, beyond the borders of the frame. This is a picture of the world that existed before this world, Melusine explains. Something came and took it away. But we remember. We must try to remember even that which has been forgotten. You never know when a memory is going to save your life. Being a child, Aster takes the camera and gets carried away taking pictures of her legs, of the ground, until the camera won't work anymore. She breaks it, in shame. The importance of documentation and memory comes up again and again in these stories. Within the silo, any physical reminders of the life that existed before, objects like Pez dispensers or pages from old books, are considered contraband. Their possession is illegal, and any curiosity surrounding them is heavily discouraged. The community is told that the rebels are the ones responsible for the gaps in the silo's history, that during the uprising they burned books and erased hard drives full of information. But that wasn't true. The suppression of information, as it so often does, came from those with a vested interest in maintaining control.
On April Fool's Day, a group of federal marshals stormed the offices of Biospheres Mission Control. They arrived armed with restraining orders. Tired of the project's growing debt, its investor, Ed Bass, had hired an investment banking firm to help get the project back under control. A little investment firm called Bannon & Co. Bannon being Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon forcibly evicted the entire management team of Biosphere 2 and was made CEO. Over 1,000 sensors had been installed inside the building, collecting valuable data about our impact on the environment, the rise of CO2 within the building, interactions between the ecosystems. A new microbe was even discovered. In the turnover, nearly all of the data was destroyed or lost for good.
In the Fallout TV series, I suppose I should give you a spoiler warning here, but the spoilers are honestly minor for the overall plot, and I was pretty vague. I don't think it'll affect your enjoyment of the show. If it does, you can sue me for $3. In the Fallout TV series, Vault Dweller Lucy ventures to the surface for the first time when her vault is invaded and her father is kidnapped. There, she finds herself woefully underprepared for life outside the vault. Lucy grew up with the belief that her vault would eventually return to the surface, where they would restore order to the wasteland and repopulate the Earth. We are bonded not just as neighbors, but by a shared duty, Lucy's father says in a speech to the vault, to keep the candle of civilization lit while the rest of the world has been cast into darkness. These survivors will need to be shown a better way. The belief that our current culture has to be preserved at all costs is why the vaults exist. They were created to preserve the values that we think are good and right today. There's an assumption in Fallout that someone who's been spared from violence can teach people how to be good and just, but the Vault Dwellers are no better at avoiding violence than anyone else. On the surface, Lucy finds her conflict resolution skills useless. Her boundless optimism comes across as offensively out of touch. She soon finds herself participating in violence in order to survive. In the wasteland, Lucy meets a man who explains to her that after the war, cockroaches evolved into radroaches. They've changed and adapted to survive. The question is, he asks Lucy, will you still want the same things when you become a different animal altogether? It's the great wrinkle in the thought experiment of generationships. How do you maintain the intent of the original founders across generations? How do you make sure that people arriving at their destination still have the same plans, the same goals in mind? Are those goals still relevant billions of miles away from our home planet? Were they ever relevant at all? Because the Matilda is just a floating prison, this metal world of torture and despair, Astor says. Whatever goals the leaders of the Matilda carry with them are wretched. With the residents of the ship denied their own history, we don't know if the Matilda started out like this. But the dominant belief system on board holds nothing worth maintaining, no values which should be carried from planet A to planet B.
By the time of Steve Bannon's takeover, an entirely new crew was living inside the Biosphere, the first crew having completed their 2-year mission. One of the former crew members, Abigail Alling, was concerned for the safety of the crew inside, given that most of the Biosphere's scientists had been ousted and replaced with investment bankers with a focus on short-term profits. She wrote a 5-page statement outlining her safety concerns. Bannon's response was to threaten to, quote, ram the report down her f***ing throat. Overnight, the focus of the Biosphere had morphed into something else entirely, and nobody inside the Biosphere knew. In the Fallout series, Before the War, we meet a Vault Tech employee who raves about an idea he has called Bud's Buds. The biggest obstacle to achievement has been the brevity of the human lifespan, he says. Bud's Buds will keep my projects on track centuries into the future. Centuries into the future, his plan is indeed revealed. Bud's staff has been cryogenically frozen and awakened, one by one, to run Bud's vault according to his vision. The future of humanity comes down to one word, Bud says: management. This is your warning. We will be discussing spoilers from the books of the Silo series. If you don't want spoilers, skip ahead to the next chapter marker, and I will see you in a few minutes. There are 50 silos in total. One silo controls the others. Its members work in shifts lasting a few months at a time, and in a darker echo of Bud's Buds, they're cryogenically frozen between each one, allowing their lifespans to stretch generations. How do you ensure the success of a long-running project? How do you keep the vision of the original leaders intact? By keeping the original leaders alive. Faced with fears over a world-ending existential threat that the founders saw as inevitable, they acted first. They sprung the threat on their own people, and they saved a portion of the population across their 50 silos. The original residents were drugged to forget their own histories until only the founders of Silo 1 carry the knowledge of what they've done to the world. Unlike the rampant capitalistic motives of Vault Tech, the founders of the silos justify their actions by seeing this as a clean slate. They want to protect humanity from the knowledge of the great harms we're capable of in order to prevent them from happening again. And they insist there was no other way. No way to de-escalate the perceived threat. No way to repair the anticipated damage. No way to use all that money and influence to improve society. Don't be silly. A congressman named Donald, who was unwittingly responsible for designing the silos, must come to terms with the system he'd participated in. Hugh Howey writes, Donald was verging on the sad realization that humanity had been thrown to the brink of extinction by insane men in positions of power following one another, each thinking the others knew where they were going. In fits of wakefulness, between decades of cryogenic sleep, Donald considers the brevity of a natural human lifespan, and he comes to a very different conclusion than Bud. This was how it works, Donald thinks. You lived, you did your best, you got out of the way. You let those who come after you choose. You let them decide for themselves, live their own lives. This was the way. It's safe to come back. You're just in time. I read a book on archival work, the theory and craft of digital preservation. The same question we're asking here comes up. How do we save something for as close to forever as possible? One person can't carry a piece of history forever. At some point, they need to let go, to pass the work on to the next generation. The archivist used the metaphor of a baton pass in a relay race. A single runner can only carry a baton so far, but a series of runners can carry the same baton endlessly. And these baton passes through history have carried legacies. Art,
history, stories. But as stories are passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, they have a tendency to shift. This mutability isn't a flaw. It allows us the chance to change our minds. Once greatly respected leaders are seen, in hindsight, as monsters, some of the things we've been preserving, we decide, never should have been preserved at all. Long-termism is the philosophy folks like Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk follow. Good sign, huh? It values the hypothetical lives of those in the future over the humanity of the present. And this trolley problem doesn't have an end. Long-termism says that climate change isn't really that big of a deal as long as humanity itself survives. It's no wonder that billionaires are building bunkers, because according to the billionaires, as long as those bunkers work out, it doesn't matter if 99% of the planet has perished. We just need a few great minds to continue our legacy. Because according to these absolute sociopaths, the concept of humanity holds more intrinsic value than an actual human life. How many times have we been told we must tolerate mistreatment for the greater good? What events in history have hurt populations while claiming to benefit society at large? How many times has power taken hold under the declaration of an emergency, a promise that the decisions being made are for our own safety? On the Matilda, the fascist lieutenant of the ship delivers a long-termist speech to Astor. "You can't see the big picture," he says. "Only the petty, small, meaningless pleasures and pains of your tiny lives. We have a purpose. The Matilda has a purpose. We are on God's path, and we mustn't stray." But they do stray. Astor's mother planted the seeds of a rebellion on the Matilda that she wasn't able to carry out within her lifespan. She passes the baton to Astor in the form of a notebook filled with clues. Astor picks up the trail where her mother left off. Together, they will change the Matilda's course. "History wanted to be remembered," Rivers Solomon writes. "Evidence hated having to live in dark, hidden places and devoted itself to resurfacing. Truth was messy. The natural order of an entropic universe was to tend toward it. That's what ghosts really are. The past refusing to be forgot." Any ideology requires someone to carry it forward, which means no ideology is immortal. These stories of closed systems ask us to consider the cost of surviving forever, of pushing humanity forward at the expense of all else, and about the people who are used as stepping stones in the process of getting from here to there. Because the only way to maintain a man-made closed system is to control it. And maintaining absolute power over a system, well, I'm gonna let you fill in the blank for what that's called. Biosphere 2 still exists today, although it hasn't been used to run a closed experiment since its first 2 attempts. After Steve Bannon dismissed her report, Abigail Alling and her partner Mark Van Thillo, another former Biospherian, broke into the Biosphere in the middle of the night to warn the new crew and to give them the option whether to stay or to leave. The crew chose to stay, but not for long. After 6 months, their mission was cut short. It was the last time anyone was sealed inside. After narrowly avoiding demolition, the building is now owned by the University of Arizona, where it's open to the public. It's changed from its original vision. Not all of the biomes are still active, but it's still used for research projects surrounding sustainability. Biosphere 2 was created with the best of intentions. It wasn't built in response to an imminent catastrophe. It wasn't meant to shelter generations. It was a science project meant to teach us more about our planet and the feasibility of traveling beyond it. Still, it was devastated by power struggles, its leaders withholding information, its crew splintering into factions, its entire deal being bought and nearly destroyed by investment bankers who would later represent the alt-right and climate change denial. In reflecting on her time in the Biosphere, crew member Jane Poynter begins to wonder if the whole thing wasn't about control. "The bottling of nature to thoroughly conquer it once and for all," she writes. "For I mused, if we can cage nature, tame it, and train it to work for us, then we've overcome a distinct glitch in our quest for species immortality. In the end, it was the Biospherians as much as their biosphere who have made a lasting planetary impact. Many still live together on their communal ranch in New Mexico, growing their own food, and they all still run ventures dedicated to sustainability. What the Biosphere taught them was their impact within a system. In a terrarium so small, the crew could measure the CO2 bloom from harvesting a single vegetable. They became keenly aware of their impact on the environment around them. In a terrarium so big as Earth, faced with challenges that feel insurmountable, escapist fantasies carry allure. But we've seen the damage that comes from isolation and containment, from disconnection and control. We already have a planet to hold us, whose repair is far more possible than its recreation. Change crawls across generations. The world cannot be ruined beyond redemption or saved once and for all in a single lifetime. In striving toward a better future, we must accept that we may never see the end results of our work. But our lives, right now, matter. It matters what we mean to each other. It matters where we've been. It matters where we're going. We must move in the direction we think is right and spend our whole lives moving. And when our feet can no longer carry us, all we can do is pass the baton to someone we love, point the way forward, and hope like hell. I have some news to share with you guys that I am really excited about. It feels like yesterday that I decided to hard pivot from cat videos to video essays. So I want to try making video essays, is what I'm saying. And I have been so overwhelmed by your response. There is a new way that you can support me. I'm very proud of it. My videos are on Nebula now. They are sandwiched between videos from people that I admire so much, people you probably know, like Jacob Geller and H-Bomber Guy, which is completely wild to me. I often hear the feedback that you guys are relieved to have a break from the slop of the internet when you watch my videos. Nebula is a hand-curated streaming platform. It is a slop-free zone. The reason this is such a big deal for me is that Nebula helps fund and support independent creators, which makes it possible for us to make the high-quality content that we actually want to make. I've said it before, and I will say it again, these videos take me forever to make, and that is something that the modern internet actively punishes. Nebula is also funding original series, like Abolish Everything and Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. This platform is exactly what I have been looking for, as someone who has rejected every single ad offer that has come my way, because I want to keep my videos as authentic as possible. Which reminds me, there are no ads on Nebula. None. This video was also published 3 days ago over there. You could have already seen it. You can watch my videos without ads before anyone else for $3 a month if you sign up for Nebula using my link or my QR code right here, which gives you 40% off a yearly subscription. Or 40% off a monthly subscription if you're not about that yearly life, or 40% off a lifetime subscription, which is a huge discount if you're not about subscriptions. Thank you for being here on my weird little journey on the internet. I feel like we're all in this together. I hope that I see you over there. I hope that you check it out. It would really, truly, directly help me. And I will see you in the next video.